Hi, this is Evan Spiliotopoulos, writer-director of The Unholy, and you are listening to The Graveyard Show.
Welcome to the Graveyard.
And welcome to another edition of the Graveyard Show podcast. I am your caretaker, and the graveyard is open. Evan Spiliotopoulos will be here in just a moment. He is the writer and director of the new film, The Unholy, which is coming out in theaters this Friday, April 2nd. It's Evan's directorial debut. Now, if you listen to my last show, you're probably wondering what happened. Because on that show, I was teasing the synthwave band Weary Pines on this show. They scored the horror documentary In Search of Darkness Part 1 as well as Part 2. And they were scheduled to be on this show. Unfortunately, I bumped them. It has nothing to do with them. It was all me. I moved them to the next podcast, and I want to thank Jamie and Don for being really cool about being bumped one show. Now, you can visit Weary Pines at their website, wearypines.com, wearypines.com. And you can also find them on SoundCloud and Spotify, where you can catch their music on there as well. Please do so. They're really, really good group and really nice guys, and I can't wait to have them on the next show. Now, what happened was, Evan and I go way back. We've been friends a long time, and I've known about Evan's film for quite a while. With the pandemic and everything going on, we kind of just lost touch of the movie, and I just recently found out that The Unholy was going to be released on April 2nd. So what I did was I reached out to Evan, said, hey, do you want to be on the show? And I wanted to make sure that his interview got out in a timely manner, thus the bumping of Weary Pines. So they will be here next show, and Evan is on this program, and I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. Evan's a really good guy, heck of a writer, and as I saw, a very accomplished director. Now, if you want to email me your complaints, you could do so at gyspodcast@gmail.com. gyspodcast@gmail.com. Thoughts, comments, problems, whatever. If you're part of the horror community, you can get in touch with me through that as well if you'd like to get some promotion on something that you're working on. Now, normally at this portion of the show, this is where I say that's the only way that you can get in touch with me. As of a few days ago, the Graveyard Show podcast has joined social media. What? Yes. Yes. Something I've been holding out on for a while. And I finally relented, and I have joined social media as the Graveyard Show podcast. So I will get into that on the other side of the interview. But you know what? I do have a couple of minutes before Evan gets here. So why don't I just tell you where you can find the show? So as I said, social media, Graveyard Show podcast. The show has joined the social media platform of, oh, no. Oh, interrupted by my grave diggers. Well, you know, once the process starts, you can't stop it. So as you hear in the background, a new grave is being added. And that only means one thing. My guest is here. A good friend is here. And, well, it's time for me to get to work. I'm a dick. Well, it's always nice to have a longtime friend joining me on the podcast as I welcome Evan Spiliotopoulos, the writer and director of the new film, The Unholy, which is out in theaters on Friday, April 2nd. Evan's screenwriting credits are just incredible. You have the new Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins film coming out that he wrote. Other screenwriting credits include the Hercules film, which starred The Rock, the live-action film of Beauty and the Beast, as well as The Huntsman, Winter's War. And it's a real thrill welcoming Evan to the show. Welcome to the Graveyard, Evan.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great having you here. Really thrilled for you. The film's really well done. And for those that are not familiar with The Unholy, what can you tell them about the plot of the film?
Well, the film is based on the late, great UK novelist James Herbert's work. His book Shrine was published in 1983. I read it when I was a teenager. I fell in love with it, and I always wanted to get into movies, and this, for me, was an obvious movie. So all my life, I've been carrying around, taking it to studios, saying, will you adopt this orphan child for me? And finally, Screen Gems bit. And what they loved about it was the combination of genres. So the plot of Shrine, The Unholy, is a journalist named Jerry Fenn, who was once famous and influential and then was caught fabricating stories, echoes of Stephen Glass. And now he basically is working for like a National Enquirer type blog. He's the lowest of the low. His career is done. And he travels to a small Massachusetts town to investigate apparent miracles. And he stumbles upon what seem to be genuine visitations from the Virgin Mary, genuine healings. This teenage girl named Alice, who has never spoken or can hear in her life, is suddenly healed, and she becomes a conduit for this wonderful divine entity. And Fenn breaks the story. He gets the exclusive. The entire world now is knocking at his door, and his career is back. And then he discovers that, well, the miracles may be coming from the other place, and he's responsible for spreading them. And now he's got to make some tough choices in his life.
What's interesting to me about Jerry Fenn, who is played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan in the film, as this investigative reporter, his character kind of reminded me of a character from another classic movie, and that's Kirk Douglas's character, Chuck Tatum in Ace in the Hole. Where both of them are in the center of the storm. But unlike Douglas's character, Jerry kind of goes in the other direction, where it's like he is having his faith and his soul being restored through this, even with all these horrible things happening around him. Was that something when you talked with Jeffrey about, was that something you talked about with these different beats that his character was going to go through in the film?
Oh, for sure. I will say, though, that Fenn's redemption arc was front and center in the screenplay that Jeffrey came aboard to do. So it's something that we really wanted to do. I kind of describe myself as a benevolent deity filmmaker. So I want my character, if I'm invested in my characters, I want them to be redeemed. And one of the reasons I went after Jeffrey for this part is precisely the same reason probably Billy Wilder cast Kirk Douglas, because when you've got a character who starts off as a heel, you better have a charming, charismatic, sexy, and funny actor playing them, and because they are going to carry the audience through this story. And in Jeffrey Dean Morgan's case, the man has made a career out of playing these charming anti-heroes, and you want him redeemed.
What's interesting to me is that you talk about in a previous interview where in this film things are not as they seem. And it seems to not only apply to Jerry and to the miracles, but also the members of the Catholic Church. There's an interesting arc that goes on in this film with all of them, because as we talked about with Jerry, he's going through this redemption. The church kind of goes through something different, right? I mean, they're kind of almost like they are playing into this.
Well, we have representations, let's say, of three different facets of the organized church. That is William Sadler, who plays the authentic, true faith. He's a small-town priest who genuinely believes, genuinely cares about his flock. Then we have Diogo Morgado's character, Monsignor Delgard, who comes in from the Vatican. And his job, which is a very real mission that the Catholic Church has, his job is the inquisitor, who must use science, medicine, and technology to disprove a reported miracle. This is a very real job that exists within the Catholic Church. The nickname is the Devil's Advocate. And it's fascinating because they don't want to accept any miracle sight unseen, because if then later logic or science or it turns out to be a hoax, it disproves this event, people's faith gets punctured. So they send a priest to do the job of the devil and try to disprove the miracle, and if they fail, then the church accepts it as genuine, which I think is fascinating. So I like to say that Diogo actually represents the church in the future, the church that embraces science. And then there's Carrie Always' character, Bishop James Giles of Boston, who represents kind of the pragmatic, real-world arm of the church, which recognizes the needs for funds in order to do God's work. But, of course, his character is a little bit like the mayor in Amity in Jaws, who's like, hey, the beaches got open. It's July 4th weekend. So when things get a little squirrely, he is looking at the dollar signs.
certainly a lot of discussion in this film about faith and fame. Did you feel that something from a book from 1983 was still very relevant in 2021?
Well, the shocking thing of it is, as I said, I've been trying to get this made since I was a teenager, but making it now was extremely fortuitous and topical because of the term fake news that's entered the zeitgeist. And Finn is specifically guilty of fake news. So I don't want to get pretentious, but the movie is, in a way, a metaphor about what happens to a community when the guardians of truth and reporting, a journalist, start spreading consciously, intentionally manifest lies, and how that can affect the community. And this is a very, very 2021 theme where basically our character has got to embrace his role as guardian of what is real, what is factual, and even if it means destroying himself, even if it means that his career doesn't advance in the ways he'd like it to.
Now, this film is your directorial debut, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Now, as a screenwriter, you're obviously writing for other directors. But when you're adapting this book into your script that you're going to be directing, did that affect anything in terms of your writing, or was it just business as usual?
It actually was business as usual. I mean, the directors that I've worked with in the past have been very gracious and praised me for delivering screenplays that are directorial in nature, that make their job easier because they're very specific. So my approach as a writer didn't really change knowing that I was going to direct it. The conscious decisions that affect a screenplay are practical. Like my screenplay changed when we had our locations simply because the geography of locations affects how you're going to block a scene. It was affected by budget. It was affected by the pandemic. We shot this film in two separate chunks. The first one was pre-pandemic, and then we stopped in mid-March, came home in the summer, assembled the footage we had. The studio thankfully loved it. They could very easily have taken a write-off off this because we're not a big-budget movie, but they wanted to finish, and the cast and crew was gung-ho. So we returned to Massachusetts in mid-September, finished the film, got all our crew back because they really wanted to complete this. And obviously my rewriting process was affected by the Massachusetts CDC and what we had to do to keep everybody fully safe and healthy. But the studio stepped in, gave us VFX budgets, and we managed to deliver a film that we feel we're very proud of and was not compromised.
That's incredible. I'm curious, how much of the film was shot pre-pandemic?
4 weeks out of 7, so we had 3 weeks to go.
Okay.
But when we came back, we added a week because what happened was we were shooting 12-hour days in our first part of photography, and the CDC regulations were 10-hour days, so obviously you're losing 2 hours a day. So that would have been a whole day of shooting. So the studio actually gave us the money to go a little bit over and shoot the film as it was supposed to.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, especially considering the sequences, without giving anything away, there are some fairly big sequences, and yeah, wow, that's really interesting. A lot of people, a lot of actors.
I got to tell you, the scene that I know you're referring to, which is our big climax, basically, we were fortunate enough, without knowing, but our first AD scheduled it as the very beginning of our shoot back in February.
Oh, wow.
So the first week of photography was the ending of the film, and I blatantly admit we would not have been able to finish this movie had we not gotten that in the can, because you just could not recreate it. I would have had to either rewrite the script completely so that the ending is something generic, like they all get trapped in the church and the ghost is picking them off one by one.
Yeah.
But one thing I want to point out about this movie, by the way, is like when you really study horror movies, the third act tends to be more intimate, like the evil has now followed you into your home, so it becomes a smaller third act. Remember The Conjuring's third act is Lily Taylor's exorcism.
Yep.
And we went consciously opposite here. Actually, the evil is growing because this is a very savvy demonic entity that is actually using modern media and modern news cycles to get acolytes. So the ending is a very big ending for a horror movie.
It really is. I mean, it's pretty darn big. I want to steer back a little bit to the writing process, because what I always find fascinating as a writer, when you get a book. Now, granted, you knew this book very well, but when you're asked to adapt something like a novel, what is that process like? Because you have to now take this piece of fiction that's in a book form that could be 400 pages, 200 pages, whatever. Now you have to present maybe a 90-minute movie, or maybe 120 if you're lucky. How does that whole process go about when you start to, like, when they hand you the book and they go, okay, this is what we want you to adapt? What are your steps to doing the adaptation?
Well, I actually really love adaptations, so I've got a whole system about it. And a writer, I wish I remembered who it was, once said that when you read a book and you put it down, the scenes that you remember will form the skeleton of your adaptation. And that's absolutely right. Shrine is a 450-page book. This was an 105-page screenplay. So one aspect of it was, what are the scenes that just burn themselves in my memory, and they're going to be the ones I'm going to throw in there. But more than that, it's deciding whose point of view this is. So the novel Shrine is much more of an ensemble. It is the entire town, the fictional town of Banfield, is a protagonist. There's the mayor, there's the townsfolk, the shopkeepers. There's a female journalist comes from the U.S. to challenge Jerry Fenn, who, by the way, the story is set in the United Kingdom. There's the town doctor. So there's many, many, many characters, enough for a miniseries. When I wanted to tell this as a film, for me, Jerry Fenn was front and center, the protagonist. And that immediately created a streamlined structure for the story. Every scene that Fenn is in gets in the movie. It was a matter of combining characters. Like now the female journalist and town doctor from the book are now just the town doctor who has a relationship with Fenn. So it's a matter of choosing your point of view, choosing your most memorable scenes, and choosing what the theme of your film is. And for me, the film was faith versus facts, and that immediately lends a certain structure that you follow.
So Sam Raimi was one of the producers of the film, obviously very famous director. He's done his fair share of horror films. Did he have any advice for you as a first-time director?
Yes. Sam was actually the main producer of the film. He was intrinsically involved in the development of the screenplay, the pre-production period. He was with us for the first 2 weeks of production, and then he went to London to direct Doctor Strange 2, and he has been involved in the post-production period virtually. Sam knows film like no one else. He is a movie god, and of course he knows supernatural horror like no one else. His main advice was, pre-production is your most important period. You will have the ability to fail there and learn things and experiment, and it will save you when you get on set and you just have no time to improvise. Certainly not improvise camera works or effects. So it was basically guiding me through the camera moves, the storyboarding, the practical effects, because we're 70-30 practical effects in this movie, 30 CGI. The costuming process, the creating the look, a memorable monster for this movie, a memorable supernatural entity. It was very much the visual / technical aspects of film production.
Which is good. It's like we always say, if you want to build a really good house, you have to create a really good foundation. So pre-production certainly is a great place to start. So you had mentioned previously that you had Jeffrey Dean Morgan in mind to play Jerry Fenn. Would have sucked if you didn't get him for the movie. Was there ever concern that you might not get him for the film? And if so, did you have backups, or was it was Jeffrey or bust?
No, I mean, I think when a studio has already decided to make a movie, yes, you go after your top choice number one, and thank goodness we landed them. But there were backups. I won't get into who they are.
Of course,
But certainly. I mean, I think that invariably happens in any greenlit film. But we were very obviously fortunate to get Jeffrey Dean. And as you know, Caretaker, I had a relationship with Jeffrey Dean that Jeffrey Dean was not aware of, because I bought his house 10 years ago.
Yes.
So we had that wonderful, surreal moment when he and I had our first phone call when he wanted to do the movie. And I'm in my living room, and I say, "Hey, buddy, do you recognize where I'm at right now?" And he fell out of his chair.
That's classic.
Yeah.
Surprise. It all comes full circle. It was meant to be. See?
Totally, right?
Now, having a veteran actor like Jeffrey Dean, you add to that Cary Elwes, William Sadler. I mean, actors that really bring a bulk of experience with them to this film. As a first-time director, did you find that that experience really helped you maybe directing scenes or fleshing out characters? Oh,
so this quote I can actually attribute. Martin Scorsese said that 90% of directing is casting. It is so true. Now, first of all, I was honored beyond belief that we got a really good cast from this. They were attracted to the screenplay. They were attracted to the characters and to the story. Carrie Elwes and Diogo Morgado, who plays Monsignor Delgado, were meetings, basically, because they are names. I mean, Diogo is a huge Portuguese and Spanish language star. So these are people who just wanted to be in the movie, and they had the right vibe for the characters. Like, for Bishop Giles, played by Carrie, I wanted a matinee idol. I wanted somebody who was photogenic and media savvy and more of a politician than a priest. That's him. For the Diogo's character, I wanted somebody who comes in like an Errol Flynn type swashbuckler. He has, as we always discussed with him, the arrogance of youth and the absoluteness of his beliefs that this is a hoax, and he's going to disprove it because that's what he's done in the past. All the other characters were auditions. Bill Sadler is an actor's actor. I mean, he's one of my favorite actors. I mean, the man has been in Shawshank Redemption and Green Mile and Tales from the Crypt, The Dark Knight, and The Mist. And obviously, Darabont knows something for casting him over and over again.
Yeah.
He is the most cooperative, warm, talented human being. He's great. We had a wonderful character actress, Christine Adams. We had Katie Asselton, who will murder me for saying this, but I had no idea who she was when she came and auditioned. And then she just sat down and said, look, my dad's a small-town Maine doctor. I'm a New England girl. I know Natalie Gates inside out. When, by the way, I've been friends with Jeffrey Dean Morgan for 20 years. So they instantly had chemistry. and then we have Cricket Brown. And Cricket, it's her first film. She's never worked in film or television before. She's done a few shorts and an off-Broadway play. And she came in and auditioned for the role of Alice. And Alice, as you know, is the linchpin and the keystone of this movie. And I think we've discovered a star here.
Yeah, she was really solid in that film. There's an interesting dynamic between her character of Alice and Jeffrey D. Morgan's character of Jerry, where he seems to have a paternal protection with her. In the interviews and in the sequences, it always seems like he's there to do his job, but he always has like this sort of like father-daughter relationship with her. Is that something that was part of the script, or was that something that just kind of developed as Cricket and Jeffrey were working together?
Definitely developed. I mean, it was essential in the script that he likes her and eventually comes to see her as an avatar of pure good that must be rescued, because one of the major changes, I should say, from the book is that Alice is evil in the book. And in the movie, obviously, I wanted somebody that we're not afraid of, but we're afraid for, because I needed to personalize the agenda of how do we save it? I mean, saving the world is such an intellectual concept. Saving Alice is something practical because we've come to love her. And so just by casting Cricket, who is a very lovable person, I think Jeffrey immediately started developing this whole paternal, like, I'm going to guide you, young actress. I'm going to guide you, Alice, as Fenn. So he jumped into the role of mentor, and it created this aspect that you just pointed out that made his desire to rescue this person very real.
And what's also interesting, too, is that there are moments in the film with Jerry where you feel like he's being genuine, but you also aren't sure if he's kind of becoming old Jerry a little bit. Like, is he manipulating? Is he kind of... There's this interesting duplicity with him during the course of the movie, because there kind of comes a point in the film where you're like, oh, he's redeeming himself. He's kind of going down the road of the good guy now. But there's still a little bit of that anti-hero that comes out, which is very interesting with him.
I think that until, we're not going to give a spoiler, but until a body drops in his lap, he is purely old Fenn. Even when certain hints start dropping that all is not well, he is old Fenn. He wants this to end up in his advantage. And once things get squirrely, let's say, it's him internally not wanting to believe it, but his journalist instincts and his eyes are telling him things are really bad. So until the top of the third act, he really would like this to turn out to be okay, because he knows what's coming and he knows what he's going to have to do to save Alice and save the world, and it's not going to be good for him. Yeah, no, it's really it's fun to watch. So it's the night before the first day of shooting. How much sleep did you get? None whatsoever. And it's really funny, because then I was just a zombie on our first day, and Carrie always was like, did you sleep last night? And I'm like, no. And he goes, nobody does. He's like, I don't sleep the night before. I've made 100 movies. I never sleep before a movie. He's like, Spielberg doesn't sleep before his first night. I will say that night, at the end of the first day of shooting, I passed out. I went back to the hotel, sat on the bed with my clothes on, with the lights on, and fell asleep. It was just exhausting.
It's a lot to make a movie. Now, you've obviously been on sets as a screenwriter. I know you visited them. You've been there. But it's really different when you're the one sitting in the director's chair. So tell me what it was like that first day on set.
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've had the good fortune to be invited on set for almost every live-action film I've done. And on Hercules in particular, I was there for the entire pre-production and 2 months of shooting. And I brought a book on set because I just didn't care. I mean, it's like, my job's done. We're not changing anything. I'm here in case there's an emergency, but I'm done. And for anybody who's been on a film set and doesn't have a job to do, it's a very boring place. Everybody else is running around on fire, but you got nothing to do. They're just moving lights for like 8 hours. As a director, the universe is on you. The eye of Sauron is upon you. And everybody's got questions. I mean, it reached a point in pre-production, without getting too graphic, I could go to the bathroom because there's a line of people outside my office, and I'm literally seeing them out of the corner of my eye taking a number to coming in and talking to me. So it's everybody's asking you questions constantly. Everybody needs your guidance, your opinion constantly. When you're shooting, it is okay. We're setting up lights for the scene, but I'm also talking to actors about the next scene we're going to do and pre-blocking it so we can just save time because everything's moving a mile a minute.
Yeah, and you got the first AD going. Come on, we got to go.
Totally, absolutely.
It's like, all right. It's a race against the clock. It really is. Yeah. It's like the minute you step foot on that set, it's like tick, 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 12 hours, 11 hours, 10 hours. And it's like, oh my gosh.
Steven Chbosky, who co-wrote Beauty and the Beast with me, who's a great director. He did Wonder, among many movies, and Perks of Being a Wallflower, said, when you embark on a movie trying to make the best movie possible, and then 2 weeks into it, you're just trying to beat the clock.
Yeah, it's true. It really is. It's like, especially like working outside, it's like, oh, the sun's up, the sun's down, we got to go. Totally. If you're shooting inside and you're shooting overnight, it's like the worst thing you hear as a crew member shooting all night is, we're going to tent the house, we're going to tent the church, we're going to tent this, because that means you're going to go well into the morning after having worked 14, 15, 16 hours overnights. It really is. It's
absolutely.
If you want to get in production, you better be ready to work in production.
I mean, I will say that I'm very glad that in the first phase of photography, when we could go 12 hours plus, we went maybe 4 or 5 nights, 1 hour over, but that was it.
No, that's great. I mean, 12-hour days, man, that's incredible. I mean, that's really well done. Now, you had your DP was Craig Warbleski, I think, I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Warbleski. Think of the W as silent.
Gotcha. Well, he shot Umbrella Academy, X-Files Legion, so it must have been nice to have a DP who has had experience working with visual effects shooting your film.
Absolutely, and in addition, he had done In the Tall Grass, the Stephen King Netflix adaptation, and he had been nominated for his Union's award for Twilight Zone: The Blurry Man. So this is a guy who also knew genre. And I got to tell you, for a first-time director, and I think for any director, your right and left hand is your director of photography and your first AD. And Craig and Steve Danton, the first AD, were just gods. I mean, they were the consummate professionals, and Craig is a visionary. So I like to say, he lit the shit out of it, and I would say that every time we rolled because it made Jeffrey laugh. And I think the film has a very unique visual style. We were inspired by Mario Bava movies, shamelessly, and specifically Black Sunday, which you'll see the opening scene as a reference to that.
Yep.
But the lighting patterns of the whip and the body, the movie Mario Bava did with Christopher Lee, which is a Gothic. And there are scenes in the film that I think visually are unlike other horror movies. This is not that gray, dark palette that you see mostly in modern horror movies. This is a very rich, colorful story because it's about awe and miracles and faith and wonder and then darkness. So Craig just captured all of that just brilliantly.
It was really well done. I did notice that. I didn't catch the Bava connection, but now that you say it, I totally understand. I mean, obviously with the beginning scene, I'm like, oh, I know that movie.
Oh yeah.
And it was great because it's the way the film is shot and the open is done, and that brings me to my next question. One of the things that came out to me in the opening sequence, it was the sound design. And I noticed the sound design throughout the film with certain effects and certain things that they were doing. And I was wondering, was that something that you had talked to them about prior, or was that something that they said, hey, Evan, here's some ideas we have, and they brought it to you and you said yes or no?
Oh, well, a little bit of both, but mostly talked about it prior. Sound design is a massive element for any movie, but especially supernatural thrillers. And it's, of course, not even what you hear. Sometimes it's the silences. But when you've got an entity in a film, you're trying to design a sound language for her as well as a visual language for her. So the way this creature, this person, spoke and sounded and breathed and moved and all the bone cracking and all that, that was entire creation. And the sound team, by the way, is the same people who did Charlie's Angels, which I worked on. So it's Cami Asghar and his group, and they are, I call them the sound ninjas, because they are like these stealth fighters that bring in this whole entire element of the film that you didn't have during production.
So were your editors working on dailies as you were shooting, or was it something that after you guys went into lockdown during the pandemic, then you kind of gathered everything up and started going from there?
They definitely were while we were shooting, but the lockdown during the pandemic was a unique experience because we actually had time to do post-production for a chunk of the movie. And I actually think that was really why we were allowed to finish, because when the studio looked at the assembly we did of those 4 weeks, they were like, oh, wait, this actually is a movie. That's
great. So you got your first film now under your belt. So there are two things that I want to ask you about directing, okay? So it could be related to any aspect of the job, pre-production, post-production, production, whatever, anything. So the first question that I have for you is this. Was there a myth about directing that was dispelled once you were done with the movie?
No, because I had been on set. So I've seen what directors go through, both the positive and the negative. So I had no illusions about what the job called for. You know, there are myths around directing that potentially, you know, you're walking around with a beret and a monocle and a bullhorn. But, you know, funny enough, metaphorically, you kind of are. Yeah. Because you're kind of, oh, sorry, I forgot the riding crop. All of those things. Metaphorically, you kind of are because you are the general of this expedition. But at the same time, you better listen to everybody. Like, I will say, when I was in college, when I got into college, I studied film, and a professor asked me as part of my admission process, do you believe directing is a collaborative process, or is it a one-person's vision? And the answer I gave him is the answer I stand by, which is it's actually both. It is your vision, the director's vision, but it is bringing your collaborators in to follow that vision, and with their ideas, listening to them to enhance that vision. I can't imagine any other way of doing it.
So it's like it's kind of a spin on the auteur theory, which is it's the director's vision, but there is collaboration and there are things that people are bringing that add to that.
I can't imagine otherwise unless the credits literally read written, produced, directed, scored, edited, shot, and composed by the director.
True. Yeah. I mean, it's true because, I mean, how many movies have we all watched, right? Where you go, wow, look at the costumes on that. Look at the look of the color in this. Look at the, you know, production design there. By the way, your production design on this film was really fantastic, too.
It's Felicity Abbott who did Upgrade. And the reason I went with Felicity is because she had never done a supernatural thriller before. And I wanted that because I wanted the film to be grounded in reality as much as possible.
Sure.
And in order for the fantastic elements to be even more effective. And she just recreated, you know, certain aspects of what we were using, Massachusetts especially, that just ground this movie in the small town, rural life. She's great.
Yeah, no, that was another aspect that definitely stood out. Are you on social media if anybody wants to follow you?
Yes, but I like reserving the social media actually for my friends.
Understood. I hear you.
Well, I'm not on Twitter at all, by the way. I think that
you're a smart man. Neither am I, and neither is the show. So I'm very happy about that too. Well, Evan, thank you so much. Listen, really, congratulations on the film. It opens again on Friday, April 2nd in theaters. If you get a chance to go to the movies and you want to see a scary film and you want to see a really good Gothic film, check it out. Evan, listen, thank you so much for being in the graveyard. It was great having you here.
Thank you very much. I loved it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And as I put this interview to rest, I want to again thank Evan for joining me on the show. It was great having him on the show. I always like having friends on the program. It's just nice to have him on the show and help promote, in this case, his film. So The Unholy, again, is out on Friday, April 2nd. Please check it out if you have time. I know some places around the country have movie theaters back open again. So if you're comfortable going and it's a safe atmosphere, go check it out. He's really, that was a great interview too. I mean, he brought some really good stuff to the party here. For any of you aspiring directors out there, I hope you were taking notes, because that was some really good information that Evan shared on the show. So it's really good free advice from someone who's been in this business a while. And that's the kind of stuff that I like to get from my guests, is that behind the scenes stuff about what it's like being a director, as a writer, adapting a novel into a screenplay. That's the kind of stuff that, you're hearing from, in this case, someone who does this for a living and is very successful at it. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something as well. Okay, so the moment we've all been waiting for. So as I said earlier, the Graveyard Show podcast has finally joined social media. I want to say reluctantly. It's something that I'm not big on for a lot of reasons. And I've been avoiding it as long as I could. Back during the first run of 2009, 2010, I went on Twitter for a little while. I should say the show was on Twitter for a while. And it was a very different atmosphere back then. And it was sort of one of those, like, everything was kind of figuring itself out. And then people were learning what Twitter was, and kind of, it was a very different time. And since coming back for version 2 of the show, there was no way I was going to go back on Twitter. No way. And so it's not Twitter that I'm on. So I thought about it long and hard, and recently just came across a social media site that I thought, this makes sense. This works. So I'm giving it a shot. There is a social media site for horror fans created by a horror fan called Slasher, and you can get it for your mobile device. And it is for horror fans by a horror fan, and it's pretty cool. If you are not familiar with it, you can check it out. It's Slasher, very simple. And it's a community for those of us in the world of horror. A lot of fans, podcasters, all kinds of folks, musicians, artists. And it just, I took a look at it about a week ago or so, went on, and I'm liking what I'm seeing. I think it's a good place for the Graveyard Show podcast to be when it comes to social media. So if you are interested and you want to follow me on Slasher, you can find me, The Caretaker, and you can find me at Graveyard Show Podcast. At Graveyard Show Podcast is where you can find me on Slasher. And I'm giving it a trial run because I just want to see how things go. I have high hopes for it, but hey, you never know. So that's where I am. That's where the show is. It's at Graveyard Show Podcast on Slasher, The Caretaker. That's me. And if you are joining me on the Graveyard Show Podcast from Slasher, welcome. It's great having you here. And if you're going to join Slasher after this, and you find me and you want to do a friend request, please, let me know if you're a listener. I'll make sure to friend you. So let's give it a shot and see how things go. So there you go. You have the Graveyard Show Podcast on Slasher, and the email address, which of course is gyspodcast@gmail.com. You can reach me either way now. The Graveyard Show Podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and everywhere podcasts exist. And of course, there's the YouTube channel, Graveyard Show Podcast. You can catch all the podcasts on there, as well as an episode of another show that I've done called Catacombs of Horror. And you can also find a playlist called GYS Classics, which are interviews that I did for my first run of the show back in 09 and 10. I'm just basically taking the interviews and just uploading those to YouTube. It's YouTube exclusive. So that and Catacombs of Horror are just YouTube exclusives for the Graveyard Show podcasts YouTube channel. And also on the GYS Classics, you never know what else you might hear on there. I do have the interviews and the original intros and outros. I left some stuff on there as well. So just some things that I think you might enjoy hearing as well. And I'll leave it at that. All right. Next podcast, I promise, Weary Pines will be here, and I'm really looking forward to that. And if you, again, if you want to check them out, wearypines.com is where you can go, and SoundCloud, Spotify. And if you've seen the films In Search of Darkness, Part 1, Part 2, this is the band that scored it. So check it out. And if you haven't seen In Search of Darkness Parts 1 or 2, you got to check them out. If you're a fan of 80s horror, that is mandatory. And then you can come back here and listen to my interviews with David Weiner, the director. All right, my friends, stay safe, stay healthy. Look forward to seeing you back here very soon. And as you exit the graveyard, I would like to remind you to please lock the gate behind you. We wouldn't want anyone to get out. Until next time.